Welcome to Preserving the Pantry, where I talk about everything related to food preserving. I am your host, Kathy Burgett.
Hello, welcome back to Preserving the Pantry. We are going to be canning again today, and today we're going to be talking about how to make and can tomato sauce. Canning tomatoes for me is still a couple months away. Right now we're in the middle of June, but I know many of you are starting to have your tomatoes on, they're ripe, and you're ready to start canning. Where I live, we're on the later end of things, so it's usually mid-August, late August, sometimes even September before I have tomatoes ready to can, but I also like to plan ahead. So I always like to know, what am I going to be canning this year and how much am I going to be canning, hopefully based on our yield of our tomatoes. But if you're ready to start canning, here's a great recipe for you. As always, I will include links to the full recipe that has everything that you need to know how to can the tomato sauce. Back in our very first episode of Preserving the Pantry, episode 1, I talked about how to can tomatoes. So that's another great option for you. And if you're new to canning or need a refresher, go back and listen to episode 9, which talks all about water bath canning and pressure canning, but just gives you a good refresher about what you need to know in order to be safe when you're canning and make sure that your products turn out well. So for canning tomato sauce for this recipe, I use about 30 pounds of tomatoes. You can use any variety that you like. I usually have a mixture just because that's what we grow is a variety of different tomatoes. And you're going to need bottled lemon juice. So tomatoes vary in acidity, and in order to make it safe for water bath canning, you have to add lemon juice. And in this recipe and in canning recipes, we add bottled lemon juice because acidity levels vary in lemons as well, but bottled lemon juice has a very consistent acidity level so that you can be assured that your tomato sauce is going to be safe for water bath canning. That's the only 2 ingredients that I add when I'm making my tomato sauce. You could also add salt if you prefer. I don't like to add it until I'm actually using the tomato sauce and adding it into whatever I'm making, and that's when I add my sauce. So you're going to start by washing your tomatoes, removing the core, and then quartering your tomatoes. Now, if they're a really large tomato, like those great big huge heirloom tomatoes, just cut them up into smaller chunks. You're going to add those into a large stock pot, and you're going to cook it over medium heat until the tomatoes have softened and broken down. You're just looking for everything to kind of sink down, for those tomatoes to soften, for the juices to start flowing. Then you're going to remove the tomatoes from there, and you're going to be straining them. You're going to get rid of the peel and the seeds from the tomatoes and just have the sauce that's left. There are a variety of different things that you can use to strain your tomatoes. Some people use a food mill. They're pretty quick and efficient. I use a chinois strainer, which is like a very fine mesh sieve, and it sits in a stand, and I put my sauce into there, and then there's a wooden pestle that you rotate around and it pushes all of the juice and the pulp out and the seeds are left behind. I use that because that's what I already have, and I use it for making a lot of my jams, like my seedless blackberry jam. And I don't want to buy another piece of equipment for this. Use what you have. The only disadvantage of the chinois strainer is it does take a little bit longer. You have to do it in smaller batches. You have to physically move that pestle around to get that through and then strain everything off. It works for me, though. So just know that there's options. There's not just one way on how you can strain that. You might even have another way to do it. Once everything's strained, you're going to return that sauce back to your pot, and then you cook it until it's reduced to a thick consistency. This could take between 6 and 8 hours, depending on your tomatoes, depending on your stove, depending on what temperature you're actually putting it on. You're going to stir that every once in a while just to prevent it from scorching, because it will if we're not careful. And you just reduce it down as much as you want. I usually put it on and just let it go all day. Tomatoes have a lot of water in them. So what you're doing is you're reducing that water off and making your sauce thicker. So go as long as you need to. Once your sauce is reduced, you're going to have your canning jars already washed and rinsed really well, have your lids already washed and your rings ready to go, and your water bath canner about half full with water. You're going to start by putting a tablespoon of lemon juice in each pint-sized jar, or if you're doing quart jars, you're going to put 2 tablespoons of the lemon juice in there. Then you add the sauce to the jars and you leave a 1/2 inch headspace. That's the distance from the top of the jar to the top of your sauce. Wipe off your rims, place the lid on, and then your rings. And you just finger tighten. You're not going to go too tight. You're just tightening with your fingers, not adding any extra strength. Then you put your jars in the hot simmering water, and once all of your jars are in your pot, you need at least 1 inch of water over the top of your jars. So if it's not up there yet, add additional hot water until it's at least 1 inch over there. Put the lid on your canning pot, increase the heat to high. Once that water comes to a full rolling boil, then you set your timer for your processing time. Pints need 35 minutes and quarts need 40 minutes, but you need to add additional time depending on your elevation. Remember, we've talked about this in the past. Depending on what your elevation is, you have to increase your time so that you are boiling for a little bit longer. I have a full chart for that right in the recipe. When your time is finished, you turn off the heat. I let the jars sit in the hot water bath for an additional 5 minutes. This helps prevent siphoning of the liquid. So siphoning is when you take your jars out and that temperature change from the hot water to the room temperature air can cause the contents of the jars to be forced out and you lose some of that liquid. You also sometimes risk your jars not sealing when that happens. So I let them sit in there for 5 minutes, then take them out with a jar lifter and set them on a cooling rack. And you let them sit there for about 12 hours. You don't touch the lid during that time and you don't tighten the ring. You just let them sit there. Once that 12 hours or longer is up, then you remove the rings, you check your lid to make certain that it's sealed, and then I always wash my jars because there's actually residue that comes from the water bath canner that's on your jars, and I don't want any of that on there when it's being stored for long term. After my jars are washed, I put the date on my jars and I label it with tomato sauce, and then I store it in my pantry. Just keep in mind that the amount of time that it takes to cook your sauce will vary. So plan enough time. This isn't something that you want to do in a limited amount of time because it changes every time I do it, depending how many tomatoes I put in there and depending on what temperature I'm actually cooking it at. If you don't have 30 pounds of tomatoes, that's okay. You can do less or you can do more. Just remember that everything is going to really cook down. If you don't want to water bath can your tomato sauce, you can also freeze this tomato sauce. Just make certain that you are freezing it in a freezer safe container. So one way to freeze it is we'll sometimes put it in plastic containers in 1 cup measurement, and I will freeze those. And then once they're frozen, I'll take them out and put them in a Ziploc bag or in a vacuum seal bag so that I can take out just 1 or 2 of those and I have the exact amount that I need for a recipe. So you can do that either way. You can have it water bath can, which makes it shelf stable, or you can freeze it. This tomato sauce is great for adding to so many recipes, anything at all that calls for adding tomato sauce. So it works really well, and I hope that you give it a try, and I hope your tomato yield is amazing this year so that you can as much as you want so you can use it all year long. I'll see you next week in the pantry. Bye. Thanks for listening. And be sure to tune in again next week for more episodes of Preserving the Pantry.